Dear students, let us continue our study in this paper titled Question Document. And as the name suggests, question document, that is, you are having a question mark on that, and very integral component becomes the anonymous letters. That is, you have to investigate that who has written that particular anonymous letter. It may be a threatening letter, it may be so many different type of letters which can be anonymous. So, in this module we shall deal with the anonymous letters, the various types, and what are the clues that you can get, and try to find out who is the writer of this anonymous letter. Dear student, you will be able to know what are anonymous letters. You shall be able to learn the examination of the anonymous letters and identify the person who has sent these anonymous letters. So, let us begin with knowing more about these anonymous letters. An anonymous letter is, as the name suggests, it is without any name acknowledged, as that of the author, contributor, or maybe the letter sent from the unknown person without any name. If, however, the letter is indecent, threatening, or in any way likely to cause a breach of the peace, then the writer puts himself in peril of legal proceedings. Whilst many cases are dealt with as civil offences, writers of blackmailing, threatening, and criminally libelous letters come within the ambit of the criminal law and are liable to long sentence of imprisonment. If anonymous letters are of threatening or blackmailing character, strenuous efforts need to be made to detect the offender wherever the offence takes place. So, with this background, let us try to study the various classifications of anonymous letters. That is, the classification can be done on the basis of motives, where they can be classified as blackmailing letters, the threatening letters, letters of revenge, letters of recommendations, the spiteful letters. And you can also do the classification into groups of common authorship. And here in this classification, it is based on the decision that can be best made to whether they are all the work of the same person or of different person. Then there will be systematic study on the collection of material for investigation, that is how the envelopes or the hidden or false clues which may be along with the letter have to be properly collected. And then the role of handwriting, how the disguised handwriting is used in making these anonymous letters, and the various methods of disguise while writing these anonymous handwritings, and then the methods of examination for authentication, how you have to do. So, let us try to study all these in more detail with the help of these graphics and visuals.
Now, let us discuss about classification of anonymous letter based on motives. Number 1, blackmailing letters. If a blackmailing letter is to be taken seriously at its face value, it should fulfill certain conditions. Number 1, the sum of money demand may reasonably be thought by the blackmailing to be within the capacity of the victim to pay. Number 2, there should be practicable instructions whereby the money is to pass from the victim to the blackmailer. Number 3, a genuine blackmailing letter should contain a hint, if nothing more definite, of some reason why the victim should be called upon to pay. Number 4, no genuine blackmailing letter is completely without the promise that the current demand is positively and definitely the last, and that if it is promptly compiled with no more will ever be heard of the matter. Number 2, threatening letters. These are fairly common, but if legal proceedings are contemplated when the author has been identified, it is important to distinguish between those threats which are real and intended to terrorists and other which are so extravagant that the writer is never likely to implement them. It is the threatening letter more than any other which sometimes contain the planted clue which has deliberately been inserted to throw the blame for the threat onto the person the writer desires to harm. It is not worthy that the threatening letter, where the writer intends and is in the position to carry out his threats, is comparatively rare, and in these cases, the recipient usually has an excellent idea of the identity of the person responsible. If he can be persuaded to speak, the investigation is simplified from the outset. Number 3, letters of revenge. A revenge is the motive behind a large proportion of anonymous letters. Included in this group are the tip off letters sent to the police, tax officials, customs and excise, and to those in authority in business and other organizations. They contain allegations of some wrongful act on the part of the person it is desired to harm in the hope of bringing them into conflict with authority. It is the threat to write these letters that is most favored by the blackmailer, and very often it is the only threat he dares to carry out. Letters of recommendation. It may happen that allegations of wrongdoing or of general inefficiency are stated in such general terms and are applied to so many people that the true object is not revenge as at first sight may appear. On the contrary, the sole aim is merely the recommendation of someone whose good character and efficiency is highlighted by the disparagement of others. In recommendation letters, it is not difficult to determine the source of letter. Spiteful letters. The letters with the intent of malicious and spite are also the range of anonymous letters which contains abusive and rude language. The malicious anonymous letter is written so that the writer, almost invariably a middle aged woman, can let her evil tongue run unchecked with little risk of having to answer for her actions. In this case, investigation of letters which are merely expression of malice and spite is often very difficult. Now, let us see classification into groups of common authorship. This classification is based on the decision that can be best made to whether they are all the work of the same person. Sometimes this is not difficult to identify the writer because of the same style of writing or the one typewriter has been used throughout. It may happen, however, that some letters are written in cursive handwriting and other in block capitals, with the remainder typed in a number of different machines. Even if cursive handwriting is employed throughout, it may be presented in several elaborated disguises chosen so as to convey the impression that more than one writer is involved. There are some points which indicate that the work is done by a single person. Number 1, ideas expressed in the letter. Number 2, quality of phraseology, which reflects the personality behind the letter. Number 3, irrespective of the manner in which these ideas are committed to paper. Let us have a look on collection of material for investigation. The essential part of the investigation is collection of standards. The amount of anonymous material should be gathered together for the chance of detecting the author of single letter may be good. It is increased out of all proportions when two or more letters from the same source are available. Therefore, discrete inquiries should be made to ascertain whether similar letter had been received by relatives, friends, and neighbor of the complainant. If the inquiries fail to reveal any further specimens, efforts should be made to induce the writer to write again. The victim should be warned to be silent and to give no outward sign of having received the offending letter. In some cases, the letters are written by the complainant himself. So, from the beginning, the investigator should bear in mind and caution should be adopted whenever the investigation is being discussed with him. Unopened letters. The letters which are continuous received by the victim and they are not open, then they indicate that the letter is recognized by the victim before the envelope is opened. Thus, they should be preserved and handed over for examination unopened. These unopened letters sometimes contain fingerprints which can be developed by an inhydrin process. The speedy receipt of an unopened letter will enable any odor associated with the paper to be detected with greater certainty than if the letter had been opened and well handled before being handed over for examination. Some specific odors indicate the specific gender of the writer. Example, if the anonymous letter is written by a woman, they are often carrying some cosmetic in their handbags, and if letter is in the bag before being posted, it will have the fragrance lingering all over it. An envelope or wrapping paper are the essential or crucial evidence in case of anonymous letters and should be preserved for further examination. And sometimes it happened that foreign bodies found in the envelope have furnished valuable evidence as to the source of the letters. Hidden or false clue. Sometimes there is a planning of clues designed to implicate an innocent person as the writer. The information of easily seen impression of addresses has already been mentioned, but this does not exhaust the list of false clues. The reuse of the envelopes on which the original name and address can still be seen is another common trick. The test, which should always be applied to clues such as these, is that of consistency with other less obtrusive and consequently more reliable evidence. Let us have a look on disguised handwriting and its significance while writing an anonymous letter. In most of the cases of anonymous letter, the disguised handwriting is used by individuals who wish to avoid identification. However, it is rare to find originality as There is a constant inner conflict between the fight of will over natural impulses. The attempt to disguise is more likely to be successful when the text is short rather than if it is lengthy, as keeping up an effective disguise is hard to maintain. Identification of authenticity is based on the principle that no two people write exactly the same. Each writing of an individual writer is unique. The skill and action of writing has been acquired with practice over a long period. The choice of style, effort, and coordination naturally varies from person to person as each individual develops at a different rate and level of ability. No one can write better than their level of skill. An individual can write at a lower level of their ability but not higher. What the anonymous letter writer does not realize is that it is their personal subconscious habits which are so ingrained, their little peculiarities that are so difficult to suppress, which leaves behind an ink trail leading to identification. The range of suspects is often narrow and often known to the recipient of the anonymous letter.
So, dear students, after knowing all this, let us try to look at this particular case where an anonymous note was found, and here it required the investigation as an examination of the cash register receipt on which the message was written. The fact that the note was written on paper, not manufactured for writing, it created significant features which prevented identification. And because of these distortions and disturbances, a comparative examination of handwriting would have been futile. Further examination of the suspect's actual handwriting as exemplars was curtailed, saving time and cost for the client. To determine that handwriting appearing on an anonymous note cannot be used to identify a writer is considered a hallmark of expertise. In the case here, the commission sought identification of the writer of an anonymous note, and an opinion of inconclusive was rendered. And this opinion was based on the facts which we will be discussing. Distortions of the handwriting appearing on the note were attributed to the writer's use of a disguise. Other disturbances in the handwriting were attributed to someone writing upon a cash register receipt paper. According to Conway, the examiner who presumes to definitely identify every handwriting with which she is confronted seeks to do that which cannot be done. Conway further says that no handwriting is susceptible to identification if it is not truly representative of its source, that is the writer. Observations, which we will be discussing more here, became limitations indicating that the handwriting was not truly representative of its source and therefore it was unidentifiable. To be identifiable, a questioned handwriting must bear significant, stable and unique characteristics upon which the opinion can be based. Because an orderly study of any questioned handwriting is a prerequisite to identify its author, the condition of the document should first be examined to determine if it is legible and suitable for comparison. And in this particular case, the anonymous note was legible and the condition of the original document was good. Next, we should ask these three questions. First, what dominant graphic trait is observed? And the dominant graphic trait is defined as the graphic trait happening most often in the handwriting. Second, can the dominant graphic trait be established as a significant, stable and unique characteristic which repeats in the exemplars? And third, can the dominant graphic trait be explained as an element of disguise writing or not? Regarding the first question, looking at the questioned writing on the anonymous note, it was observed that the dominant graphic trait is letter impulse writing. Letter impulse writing results when a person writes each word one letter at a time, the hand moving to a new position to form each letter, and this then created a baseline which was individual and unique for each letter. Letter impulse writing is a very short pen scope, and if we try to define the pen scope is defined as the amount of writing done before the writer makes a notable readjustment in movement or without a break in the progressive motor sequence. Letter impulse writing means that a notable readjustment is made or a notable break in continuity occurs between each letter. Sentence impulse writing, on the other hand, means that entire sentences are written without such readjustment or break. Next, as to whether the dominant graphic trait, that is the letter impulse writing, can be established as a significant, stable and unique characteristic which repeats in the exemplars, we can consider that pen scope is a uniquely identifying characteristic, but if and only if it repeats in the exemplars. However, the pen scope observed in the exemplars of the suspect, in this case submitted for the examination, it showed sentences and not the letter impulse writing. Further, it is assumed that the exemplars submitted were representative of the entire population of suspects. The note's dominant graphic trait would then be explained as the element of the disguise, and this would limit the comparative examination of the handwriting submitted by the two prime suspects, because as indicated their handwriting was written with sentence impulse exclusively, which defined them as skilled, graphically mature writers. In discussing the identification of handwriting involved in a disguise, one would consider the use of letter impulse writing by a skilled writer to be a distortion of his or her usual handwriting habits. When letter impulse handwriting is executed by graphically mature writers, it is defined as unnatural handwriting. The anonymous handwriting can then be considered not truly representative of its source and therefore unidentifiable. Every handwriting can be identified with its author provided it contains the handwriting habits, individualities and characteristics of its author in adequate kind and number. In the anonymous note, another significant feature which prevented the identification was the lack of any potentially identifying characteristic to use as a basis for opinion, and this was due to the brevity of the message and the fact that the only letters which did not repeat in the anonymous handwriting are A, E, H, I, N, O, U, W, Y were written differently each time. There was no distinct pattern of letter formation. Therefore, this comprised a limitation in this particular case. Even though variation in letter forms were observed, these letter forms did not repeat often enough on the note to be considered a pattern. Generally, letter forms in themselves are rarely identifying graphic traits because they are most often class characteristics and the easiest graphic traits to alter. In general, however, the observation of a pattern of variation of letter form or the peculiar use of a letter form in a particular situation could be uniquely identifying. So, you should keep all these things in mind while doing investigation of such letters. Next, the disturbances of the anonymous handwritings were then considered. It is impossible to identify the handwriting which is qualitatively inadequate. Close scrutiny should be made of every feature of the handwriting to determine whether there are variations that would indicate the unusual conditions. In the handwriting in question here, the effects of an irregular writing surface were observed via regular patterns of interruptions in each stroke. The surface on which the paper was laid while writing could be disturbed. Because this disturbed line quality showed a uniform pattern of corrugation, it was distinguishable from the true tremor. Irregular writing surfaces can interfere with smooth movement of the writing implement. In this case, it was a pencil, and also affect the appearance of the handwriting. Writing done under usual conditions may not be suitable for comparison purposes, and this added to the basis of opinion in this case. Also of importance in this case was the fact that the anonymous note was written with a pencil on a cash register receipt, further limiting the identification of the writer. Paper type plays an important role in the formation of the different characteristics of the pencil strokes. The surface texture of the paper manufactured for writing is finished, so writing instruments may move freely on the surface. The cash register receipt was not actually the paper manufactured for writing. Additionally, it was observed that a very light pressure was used by the writer of the anonymous note. The pressure patterns observed in anonymous note was reasonably explained by the writer's attempt to prevent erosion of the cash register receipt paper. And this is the note you can see which was made. And in summary, what we can say is the combination of limitation discussed herein with their accumulative significance, they form the basis of the opinion that it was inconclusive as to identify the writer. However, as to the opinion that the writer could not be identified, that conclusion was definite. Identification was prevented by the combination of observations, that is, the significant, stable and unique characteristics did not repeat in the exemplars. Another thing, the particular disguise and the note's limited amount of words was another limitation. Another thing, there was the corrugated line pattern and the artificially light pressure which was deliberate. In general, what was lacking in this document were the elements which a competent document examiner would require to make a scientific identification of a writer. So, after studying this case, I think you can now analyze what all we have learned and how it has to be applied to a new case, and what all characters you will see that to identify the writer of the anonymous letter. So, dear students, let us now summarize what we have learnt in this module. We have learnt what are anonymous letters A letter whose authorship is unknown are known as anonymous letters. But the major concern from forensic point of view comes when these letters are threatening letter, recommendation letter in the wrong sense, blackmailing letter, etc. The anonymous letters always have some motive for sending them, and these motives are mostly to take revenge from the victim or to even harass them. In case of anonymous letters, the evidence that should be collected is the envelopes, the letter, and the examination of any order or fingerprints on the envelopes. The authentication of the letter should be proved by the investigator by keeping in mind all the parameters we have discussed.